Hey guys, it's your boy Ren City, back at it again, your host of Sports and Shorts of Sorts, the weekly podcast covering sports, with a little bit of shorts at the end. Doing our thing again, the NBA recap. This is week 23 into the season now. Like, looking at the regular season schedule, this is the second last episode of the regular season, meaning next episode, that's the last episode for the playoffs. Playoffs! They're right there, so we'll see which teams are playing their best ball at the best time. So we'll start in the Eastern Conference. We'll start with the Atlantic, with the team that has the best record in the NBA still. They've had it most of the season. Boston Celtics, they went 3-0 this past week, avenging those back-to-back losses they suffered to the Hawks before last episode. Celtics would go beat a tough Pelicans team in New Orleans and then beat the Hornets in Charlotte. They followed that up by returning home and destroying an OKC team that was missing a few of their main guys due to injury. Sound like a broken record all season saying how good this Boston Celtics starting five is. It's the best in the NBA in my opinion. When healthy, they have it all. That duo of Tatum and Brown. So much playoff experience at such a young age. The trio of Porzingis, White, and Holiday fill out that lineup great. KP is a third scorer, taking so much pressure off him. He's growing his horn again as the unicorn he once was in the Big Apple. All those problems we talk about with the Bucks, and we'll get to those problems, they relate to the absence of Drew Holiday. What Drew left in Milwaukee, he's brought to Boston, and it's the real deal. A 13-game advantage over second place in the conference is wild. But this Celtics team, it's not about the regular season for them. I've mentioned it before. This is about the title. This home court advantage throughout, this is big. This is big for them because, like I said, it's championship or bust. This team either lifts that Larry O'Brien trophy and we can finally nod our head a bit at that Tatum-Kobe Bryant comparison, or like a paddling canoe, there's always an or. The Celtics come up short. Mazzulla may be the sacrificial lamb, and the Celtics get rid of him to bring in a veteran coach. Probably Doc Rivers after the Bucks fire him. No, I'm kidding on that. We won't say that. But hey, we'll see what this team does in those high-pressure situations. A lot of these guys have been there, but they haven't finished it. We'll see with this new group. Maybe they get over the hump. Leave Beantown. We'll go with the Big Apple. The Knicks, fifth best record in the Eastern Conference, went 1-3 this past week. They were in a thrilling game in San Antonio where Jalen Brunson would score a career-high 61 points in an overtime loss to the Spurs, the second highest total in Knicks history behind Carmelo Anthony. But I'm sure Brunson probably would have preferred the win in that one. The Knicks then lost a tight one at home on the last-second shot to the Thunder. They then lose their third straight on the road to the Miami Heat. The Knicks would then get back in the winning column when they'd return home and beat the Kings. At one point, they were down 21 in that game, but they turned it around to secure the win. Who else but the Villanova Wildcat guys? Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, all massive in that comeback win. Maybe that comeback could be the spark to get those Knicks back on winning ways. And this team's still integrating the return of Mitchell Robinson to the lineup after his lengthy absence. We know Hartenstein was dealing with a return from injury as well. There's talk OG Anunoby might be returning to the lineup from injury. However, massive blow on the injury front to the Knicks. All-star Julius Randle, he's been trying to come back this season, but rehabbing is not cutting it. He's going to undergo surgery to repair that shoulder and come back for next season. It seemed like surgery was the only option. It's a rough blow to the team. They're going to miss him big time, but the Knicks have a 3-game cushion above those play-in spots, but they have some tough games this week. 2 matchups with the Bulls, game against the Bucks and the Celtics. They'll want to win some of those games and keep that gap at a safe distance. We'll leave New York. We'll go to Philly. The Sixers sit in the 8th seed out east. Philly went 3-1 this past week, losing a close one to Cleveland. They just would bounce back to winning ways, beating up on the Raptors, which isn't hard to do nowadays. They would then host the Thunder, and Maxey would have to miss the game to some hip soreness, but Sixers fans rejoice. They had last year's MVP, Joel Embiid, finally returned to the lineup. Embiid had missed the last 29 games after suffering a meniscus injury at the end of January, and you could tell he was gassed getting his first game, as you can't replicate the stamina of playing a basketball game sometimes, and you could tell he was gassed, but man, he made big plays down the stretch, showing that, he's an MVP player. He's won it last year. He tried to get crossed up by Josh Giddey, and he stole the ball, took it the other way, getting fouled, and he makes his free throws. It's huge. Maxey would return in the lineup the next game against Miami, and they'd get to see that 1-2 punch in action that we haven't seen in so long. Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. Maxey's 37 points, 11 dimes, 9 boards, almost a triple-double, while Embiid scores 29. This team, if the Sixers team can get healthy, and if Embiid can play, look out. They could do some damage. Tobias Harris is missing a few games with knee soreness, but nothing considered serious. And the Sixers team is just one game behind the Pacers for that 6th spot, that guaranteed playoff spot out of the play-in round. So you can tell this Sixers team, Nick Nurse is going to be preaching, hey, 6th or higher, let's go for it. So we'll see what happens. You don't want to be in those lower seeds and have to play the Celtics in the first round, but just great to see Embiid back on the floor. We'll reverse it back to New York, go to Brooklyn. The Nets went 2-2 this past week. They beat up on the Bulls at home, and they lose at home to the Lakers before going on the road and getting obliterated by the Pacers. They returned the Pacers in the next game when they returned to Brooklyn, and the Nets won by 4. Cam Thomas is still being the one consistent piece over this past few weeks for this team, and on any given night, it's hard to tell who the next leading scorer is. From Mikal Bridges to Dennis Schroeder, even one night Trendon Watford. You never know who's coming up. And in the win against the Pacers, 2023 first-round pick, Noah Clowney looked like his alma mater, Alabama, and what they're doing in the tournament. He just looked great. 22 points, 10 boards off the bench in 17 minutes. We'll probably see more of him before the end of the season's done. And this Nets team and their season's kind of been in disarray, but they can still pull off a win here and there, maybe play some spoilers and find who's going to stick around for next season. Speaking of teams with an interesting offseason ahead of them, the basement of the Atlantic, the Toronto Raptors, man, they've been struggling. I mentioned their losing streak last week, and it's continuing. It's just getting worse. Raptors went 0-3 this past week as their losing streak is at 15 games. Second most by this franchise ever. They're just 2 losses away from tying the franchise record for most in a row at 17. The Raptors lost at home to the Embiid-less Sixers, and then they lost to the Lakers before going into Minnesota and losing by this. 48 points, the worst loss in franchise history to the Raptors. 48, that's unreal. This is a team that just seems to be limping to the finish line, wounded, and just want to get it done. There was some positive news for this team. R.J. Barrett returned in that loss to the Lakers. It was the first time we got to see R.J. on the floor since the passing of his younger brother, Nathan. He scored 28 in the loss. He had missed the previous 9 games prior. You can only imagine what he's going through, the struggling of his team, the struggling mentally, dealing with the passing of a sibling. I can only imagine. So it was great to see him on the floor doing what he loves to do. The Raptors, they were short-handed against the Wolves, and looks like they'll have a little more competitive roster tonight against the Bucks. And the Raptors follow the Bucks. They'll return home to take on the Wizards on Sunday, a game that could potentially end this losing streak. Or if the Raptors lose both those games, they could be setting a new franchise record for a losing streak against the Pacers. This is a tough time for the Raptors right now, from roster overhaul to injuries to literal deaths in the family. It's been an awful season for them. I really hope they can break this losing streak and prevent more negativity getting piled onto the season. Tough task for Masai going into the offseason, and this is not the debut season Darko Rajokovic was hoping for. It's probably as worse as he could have expected, or could have hoped for, really. But we'll go to the Central Division. We'll leave the Atlantic. We'll start with the division leading Milwaukee Bucks. They're leading the division and holding down that number 2 seed in the East, but just barely. The Bucks went 1-2 this week, beating the Hawks in Atlanta. They then go to D.C. and lose to the Wizards. Yeah, the Bucks lost to the Wizards. Giannis Antetokounmpo dropped 35 points, a triple-double, and they lost to the Wizards. The Bucks would follow that up by returning home and losing to the Memphis Grizzlies. The second time they've lost to the Grizzlies this season. I mean, Damian Lillard's missed the last 3 games, dealing with that groin injury. He's listed as questionable for the game against the struggling Raptors. I don't know if they'll play him in that. The Bucks lose to the Raptors, though, and end that Raptors 15-game losing streak I just mentioned. These fans gotta be losing their mind. They can't be happy with the results of new head coach Doc Rivers. They brought the Doc in, and what the hell's the Doc doing? He's got a 15-15 record with the Bucks since coaching, first starting with them on the 29th of January. And remember, former head coach that they fired, Adrian Griffin, he was 30-13 when they fired him. Doc Rivers has 2 more losses than his predecessor and 13 less games coached. That's not a good look. And during the week, Doc Rivers was calling out the Milwaukee Bucks travel crew for the lack of seriousness in them doing their job. I know a while ago now, earlier this season, JJ Redick called out Doc for throwing players under the bus continuously, and there's truth to it now, and you can see Doc is throwing the people that work on the bus now under it. Everyone's going under. Tough times in Milwaukee, and that game against Toronto, it's big on an optics level. If they lose that, whew, you'll hear sirens going off, I imagine. The East is much easier than the West. The Bucks, they'll be in the playoffs. That's no question. But they'll want that higher seed. They're in the second. They currently reside there. But the way they're trending, this could change soon. They got matchups, like I said, against the Raptors. But they play the Knicks and Celtics and Magic. So by the next episode, for these NBA recaps, they could be lower in the standings. I don't know if the Dogs got the remedy here, but we'll see. Big games for the Bucks coming up. Just behind Milwaukee with the third best record in the East, Cleveland Cavaliers. They went 2-2 this past week, beating an Embiid-less Sixers team. They then got thumped in Denver by the defending champs, but bounced back to beat the Jazz. But then they'd fall in the desert to the Suns. A literal up and down week for this Cavaliers team. They've dealt with injuries all season, and it's, like I said in previous episode, it's amazing what JB Bickerstaff has done with this team. He needs to be talked about more for Coach of the Year. Just the adversity to get over what they've been dealing with all season. I've said the East is not as strong as the West. The standings show that. But for this team to be sitting third in the East, it's simply amazing. This team's finally getting healthy. Donovan Mitchell's working his way back into the lineup. If he's not, like, he hasn't been healthy all season, but what better time than now, just leading into the playoffs. Evan Mobley, he's been getting back in the lineup, playing some good ball. This team's a threat to beat anyone in the East, even the Celtics. They've already beaten them once this season. And with these guys coming back, that means Karis LeVert can go back to the bench, where he's one of the best six-man players in the league. Things aren't going to get easier for the Cavs. They take on the Lakers, Clippers, and Grizzlies in the next 3 games. So this will be a nice barometer to see where these Cavaliers teams measure up. And I say be afraid. I've mentioned it before in these weekly recaps, but this is the most dangerous team that Cleveland has had since LeBron left. Still stand by that. Chasing those 2 teams in the division are the Indiana Pacers. They have the 6th best record in the East, and they went 2-1 this past week, beating the Lakers and then trouncing the Nets before losing to the Nets. The Pacers must have been looking ahead on the schedule and just, it was a trap game because they probably should have won that one. Halliburton and Pascal Siakam, great 1-2 punch. The depth is there, still missing Mathurin, obviously, for the rest of the year hurts, but different players stepping up at different times. They can play offensively with anyone. It's that defense, still suspect, not showing up when they need it in crucial times. Miles Turner, his numbers, they're just not as good as I feel they should be, especially in the rebounding side. I mean, I can't hate on him here. He dislocated his finger, getting fouled on a dunk attempt, looked nasty, and he popped that shit back in. That was cool. He might miss some time over that. Jalen Smith, Isaiah Jackson, one of y'all, step up, protect that paint for the Pacers. They're both capable, I feel. Jalen Smith especially, some nights, he shows that he can jump through the ceiling. He's got potential, but we'll see who can fill that role while Turner deals with that nasty finger injury. I mentioned Siakam and Halliburton, they've been doing their thing, but they need that help inside. At the beginning of the season, I said, the Pacers will be this year's Sacramento Kings. That's a little steep. They're not going to be a top 3 team in the conference, but they're trying to hold on to that 6th seed and get that guaranteed playoff spot, avoid the play-in positions, but they got some tough upcoming games here. The Thunder, Heat, maybe that record-breaking game against the Raptors, and give them their biggest losing streak ever. We'll see what happens with the Pacers. Some big games for everyone this late in the year. We'll go to the Windy City, the Chicago Bulls, 9th best record in the East, and they've clinched a play-in position. We know they're going to be the 9th or 10th spot here. They went 1-2 this past week, falling to the Nets, but then stunning the Timberwolves in Minnesota. The Bulls then fell at home to the Hawks team that they'll probably be matched up with in the play-in round. I say they've locked that 9-10th. I mean, there's a slim chance at this point of them potentially getting the 8th. But it's probably going to be a 9-10th matchup between them. But anyway, this is still DeMar DeRozan's team, especially with Zach LaVine out. Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, they've been really consistent scorers lately, especially Kobe White. We'll get more on him on that MIP talk later. But I think it's going to come down to this big man combo of Vucevic and Andre Drummond. I know it's tough to play two bigs in the league today, but if they can have those guys out with Alex Caruso being a floater, getting steals and scoring as he did in that win against Minnesota, they could surprise someone. I don't know if they're good enough to beat him in a series, but they have the depth there with the right group of youngsters. They have it, but I don't know if they'll do it. We'll wrap up the Central by going to the Detroit Pistons. They went 1-2 this past week, going on the road and beating the Wizards before losing a tough one at home to the Grizzlies. Cade Cunningham had a chance to equalize in the dying seconds, but missed. Next game in Atlanta, the Pistons would lose again, but they'd have one player go way off. Like an NBA Jam, he caught fire. This was a guy who started the season with the Toronto Raptors buried on the bench. Nick Nurse never played him when he left. You thought maybe to get some time. He didn't fit in the rotation. Shipped to the Knicks. He saw no time with Tibbs, and he got traded to the Pistons. I'm talking Malachi Flynn. Came off the bench, 50 points. Yes, 50 points off the bench, coming against the third player in NBA history to do so. Nick Anderson was the first with the Magic in 93. Jamal Crawford set the record with 51 off the bench with the Phoenix Suns in the last game of the season back in 2019. And oh yeah, that Jamal Crawford game, he was 39 pulling that off. That shit's unreal. I still blows my mind how Jamal Crawford hasn't been in the league over the past few years. But that's another story. But Malachi Flynn, 50 points, obviously a franchise record off the bench for the Pistons, and he has the lowest scoring career average of anyone who scored 50 in a game. He came in this averaging a career 5.2 per game for his career. Like I said, not cracking the lineup in Toronto, barely sniffing the court in New York. Maybe Detroit's for Malachi gets his time to shine, and you can never take away a 50-point game from him. He's in an elusive club with 164 other players as of this recording to ever play in the NBA to score 50 points in a game. He's the 10th player to drop a 50-burger this season. It's been a tough season for the Pistons, and they're just looking to finish strong, carry some kind of momentum in the next season. Finishing out east, we go to the Southeast Division, starting with the division-leading Orlando Magic. They possess the fourth best record in the East. The Magic went 3-1 this past week, losing a close one to the Clippers that went right down to the wire. But then the Magic would win 3 in a row. Taking down the Grizzlies, they would then barely hold on to beat the Trailblazers before going into New Orleans and beating the Pelicans. Paulo Banchero's been an absolute beast for the Magic, letting everyone know he is more than deserving of that number 1 overall choice a few years ago. The sweet thing with the Magic lately is even when Paulo isn't at his best, like that game against the Blazers, the rest of the squad raised their game to get that W. That's the next step of this developing team on the fly. The Magic have a favorable matchup with the Hornets before playing the Bulls, Rockets, and Bucks for our next episode. Very important games for this young team. Hold on one second. Wow, just sneezed on a podcast. That's a first. Anywho, excuse me. Staying in Florida, we go to Miami. Heat, 7th best record in the East, went 3-1 this past week. They absolutely destroyed the Trailblazers, beating Portland by 60 points. It was ugly. Ugly. The Heat then beat the Wizards and Knicks before losing at home to the 76ers with their reunited duo of Embiid and Maxey that I alluded to earlier. The Heat are playing better ball near the end of the season, as they do most seasons. The Heat are just a half game behind the Pacers for that 6th seed, which would keep them out of the play-in round, but we know what the Heat can do from the play-in round, making it all the way to the finals last season before falling to the Nuggets. Heat culture seems to be a real thing, and it shows up this time of the year like Bigfoot in the Northwest. They go on the road to face the Rockets and the Pacers, which, like I mentioned earlier, they're just above them in the standings. That one's huge. Then the Hawks before returning home to host the Mavericks. No one wants to face the Heat this time of the year. Leaving Florida, we'll go to the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks have the 10th best record in the East and have clinched a play-in spot. That means no one from below is going to catch them. Hawks went 2-2 this past week. They lost at home to the Bucks, but bounced back winning in Chicago. I mentioned earlier that could be a series. They could trade spots with Chicago, and so depending who's going to get home court in that one. They then beat Detroit back at home. The Hawks then went to Dallas and got a little overmatched by the Mavericks, but like I said, this team is locked down a play-in spot, most likely against the Bulls, and they're going ahead without Trae Young. He's out for the rest of the year. We know that. DeJounte Murray, he's got the reins. He's been holding down that point guard position in Atlanta. Some nights he's a little trigger happy, but when he's dishing out, his efficiency goes up, and they got guys that can score. Bogdan Bogdanovic, reliable scorer. He's the real deal. And the wild cards are really the versatile wing players for this team. You've heard me talk of Jalen Johnson on this podcast before, saying MIP talk with him. He just had a 28 point, 14 rebound, 11 assist night in a win over the Pistons. But I'll get back to talking about his game later in that MIP talk, like I said. But DeAndre Hunter, another huge difference maker for this team. These are long, athletic guys, and if they can just elevate their game a little more, they can really influence this team improving in the future. And another shout out, I gave him a bit of a shout out last time. Czechia player Vit Krejci. This guy, when he balls out, he balls out. He's not always out there, but man, he leaves it out there, and he's an efficient dude. So this very exciting player to watch. This Hawks team has a tough road ahead of them just to get through the play-in rounds and make it into the postseason. These are a bunch of ifs here, but if they do, and if they get matched up with the Celtics, we know they've beaten the Celtics a few times this season. Maybe we could say a repeat of the 2007 We Believe Warriors. Remember when they beat the Dallas Mavericks, that number 8 seeded Warriors team beat a 67-win Mavericks team in the first round. Some consider it the biggest upset of all time. You know how well the Hawks have matched up with the Celtics this year. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. That's a long road to something that may or may not be there. But if it is, look out. Going to Charlotte, the Hornets went 0-4 this week as they're rocking that 4-game losing streak, losing all games at home, losing to the Warriors, Clippers, Celtics, and Blazers. I mean, it's a tough go for a lot of teams. The only close of those games was against the Blazers. That one was somewhat close. The other ones were blowouts. Number 2 overall pick, Brandon Miller, has been the one bright spot for this team. Miles Bridges has played well, but we don't know his future with the team. This team looks like they're kind of done with the season and ready to press that reset button. Head coach Steve Clifford has announced he'll step down at season end, so they're looking like they're in autopilot, just getting to that off season. This season's been full of disappointment, injuries, and trades. Totally revamped roster. Probably best for the franchise just to reevaluate and see what direction they want to go next season. The biggest thing is the health of LaMelo Ball. How's his ankle? Will he be able to play next year? His pops, LeVar, we haven't heard from LeVar Ball in a while. He's popping off saying it's Puma's fault they ruined his ankle. We'll see what the apparel company thinks of that. It's no big baller brand shoe, I guess, but yeah, I can't imagine Puma is very happy with that. We'll wrap up the Eastern Conference, though, by finishing with the Washington Wizards. They went 1-3 this past week. The Wizards would lose to the Pistons and Heat, but they'd shock the world, especially Bucks fans, when the Wizards would beat Milwaukee. The Wizards would then push the Lakers in a close game but fall short late. Denny Avdia has been playing great ball this year, but he was literally knocked out of the game against the Lakers when LeBron James caught him with an elbow. He was just spinning in the paint, but the way it connected, did not look good. Corey Kispert, he's been showing out lately, telling people that, yeah, I am worthy of that first-round pick selection, I was. But this team's playing for next season. It's tryouts out there, people trying to figure out if they're going to be on the team, try to get some kind of momentum going in the next season. We going out west to the Northwest, that rotating door at the top of the division and conference. It's changed hands a few times with the current leaders, as of this recording anyway, are the Minnesota Timberwolves. Wolves won 3-1 this past week, beating rivals Denver in the Mile High City. They then underestimated the Bulls, losing at home to Chicago, but the Wolves bounced back, beating the Rockets, giving the Raptors, as I mentioned earlier, their worst loss in franchise history. Anthony Edwards is the young leader of this squad. Swag City going the way. He just booms confidence. You want to play with that guy, leading way beyond his years. Naz Reid in the lineup instead of Karl Anthony Towns. The Wolves are somewhat more efficient. I know he's not the scorer the Catman is, but efficiency on both sides of the floors, maybe that makes Karl Anthony Towns the all-star suddenly available. I don't know. He's injured. He's got a massive deal. But hey, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. They're number 1 seed here. Let's not trade anybody. But this team is still the best defensive team in the league. Rudy Gobert anchoring the defense. This team looks built to win in the playoffs. I know they have youth in key areas, mainly Edwards, but like I said, he seems wise beyond his years. This team has shown immaturity at times during the season. Chris Finch, possible coach of the year, might have used those as teaching moments, and Cat may be back before the playoffs. He might get out of that injured cage and the Cat will be released. And if he can get that scoring back in the lineup, integrate nicely, maybe have him come off the bench a bit and have Naz Reid start. I know contract-wise that does not make sense, but you got to do what you got to do for the team. It could work. Just behind the Timberwolves in the division and the conference are the defending champion Denver Nuggets. They went 2-2 this past week, losing that game in Minnesota that I mentioned earlier. The Nuggets would then bounce back, beating the Cavs by 29 before winning a close one over the Spurs. Sorry. They would then lose a tight one to the Clippers, where Jokic had a huge night and a chance to win the game at the buzzer, but missed. Nuggets still look like they can repeat and win back-to-back titles, but they are missing one of their key pieces. Canadian point guard Jamal Murray, he's missed the last 7 games with a knee injury, and this team can win in the playoffs, but I don't think they can win a championship without Jamal Murray. We've seen what's happened when he wasn't in the lineup. They didn't raise it. He had a good run with them last year. It was important to them winning the title. This team knows their roles, and one of their roles are missing right now. Not an issue I have, but there are roles missing there. The Nuggets play the Hawks, Jazz, and Timberwolves for our next episode. We'll see where they stand there. The third spot, just behind the 2 teams I mentioned, are the Oklahoma City Thunder. They went 2-2 this past week, beating the Suns soundly. They then beat the Knicks with a clutch jumper by SGA, but SGA picked up a quad injury in that win over the Knicks, and J-Dub, Jalen Williams, tweaked his ankle. Both players would miss the next 2 games, and surprise, surprise, the Thunder would lose the next few games, losing a close one to the Sixers where Embiid returned, and like I mentioned earlier, Giddey had that costly turnover late. The Thunder would then get blown out by the Celtics in Boston. Didn't help things. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was sent home from the road trip, so he won't play in the next 2 games. Jalen Williams won't play against the Pacers today, and he may be available against the Hornets Sunday. I don't know if they're going to play him in that. The Thunder also play the Kings and Spurs before the next episode, and there are big games with the Thunder and trying to get this Western Conference supremacy here. And if they lose to the Pacers, they'll have their first 3-game losing streak of the year, which is very impressive for the second youngest team in the league. It's a good team, but without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams, they are not the same team. So a team that's already eliminated from the playoffs, Utah Jazz 0-3 this past week as their lengthy losing streak grows to 10 games. Second current longest streak in the NBA behind the Raptors there. The Jazz lost a tight one at home to the Rockets before losing big to the Kings and Cavaliers. Utah's losing streak may not end before the next episode. The Jazz go on the road to take on the Clippers and Warriors before returning home to host the Nuggets and Rockets. So this could get to 14 games real quick. The Jazz are a lot of losing young teams right now. The minutes are getting split up. The front office is sitting back, seeing who's sticking around. The constant at Colin Sexton is a great addition for any young team. This guy gives 110 every time he's on the court. Young guys need to watch him, and you just say work like that guy. Can't hurt. So each night you might have a different leading scorer. John Collins one night, Colin Sexton the other, Bryce Sensabaugh the other. The Jazz are just playing spoilers right now, trying to hurt playoff teams that are trying to move up the standings while trying to end their losing streak at the same time. Nobody likes to lose. People say tanking, but hey, these are professionals. They don't play to lose. You play to win the game. Wrapping up the Northwest, we go to Portland. Trailblazers went 1-2 this past week. Blazers lost by that, like I said, that embarrassing 60 points to the Heat, as I alluded to earlier. They then lose a close one to the Magic, where they had a chance to win it. Then they get a win in a tight one over the Hornets. Number 3 overall pick Scoot Henderson winning the duel over number 2 overall pick Brandon Miller. Scoot would have 22 points and 10 dimes in that win. Despite being in different conferences, those 2 players will always be linked to each other because of where they were drafted in that draft. It's good to see DeAndre Ayton back on the floor. He's had trouble staying on the floor this year, and he really helps that team when he's out there. He's still one of the best rebounders in the game. Speaking of rebounds, we have to shout out Blazer youngster Jabari Walker, son of former NBA player Samaki Walker. Jabari getting 14 points and 22 boards in that win over the Hornets. Like I said with the Jazz, it's tryout time, See who's sticking around. I hope Canadian Delano Banton sticks around. He's been having a great time in Portland. We leave the Northwest, go to the Pacific, starting with the team with the 4th best record in the West. The Pacific leading Los Angeles Clippers. Clippers went 3-1 this past week, winning a close one over the Magic, where Paul George had a go-ahead bucket late in that one. Paul George would then light it up again as the Clippers thrashed the Hornets. PG would score 41 points and 7 boards, showing out in front of rookie Brandon Miller, who has said Paul George is his favorite NBA player. So that was probably a wicked moment for him. Clippers then lost to the Kings in Sacramento before bouncing it back and beating the Nuggets at home, where I mentioned Jokic had a chance to win it late. The last few games were played without Kawhi Leonard, who's missed a few games, like I said, with knee inflammation. He's had a pretty healthy season, so this could be some good rest for him that could go a long way in the playoffs. Like I said, Paul George has been huge lately. James Harden has been struggling to find his shot, but he's been really instrumental in getting his teammates involved. We know he can dish it, especially Zubac. The fact that Zubac and Harden were on another level against the Nuggets. The pick and roll between those two was just great, and Harden would find him. And then, the thing I love about Zubac is he always tries to dunk. He does not like to lay it up. He wants to dunk every time. If I was 7 feet, shit, I'd try to do that too, I think. But I mentioned it before. I've wobbled about it. The Clippers, they're scary, man. This is a horror movie team. You do not want to be alone with them in a playoff series. They could take you down. If they're healthy, they have these hungry players that have been close to rings and never got them. That's a whole different motivation that you can't just stir up in anybody. So if this team's healthy, if Kawhi can be the Terminator like he was with the Raptors when they won the title, they could come out of the Western Conference here. Just saying. The team with the 6th seed, just above the play-in spots, the Phoenix Suns, they went 2-1 this past week. The Suns stunk up the joint in OKC, but bounced back, beating a tough Pelican team. Devin Booker went off on the Pelicans, throwing up a 50-burger with 52 points and 9 dimes. And the wild thing about that 50-burger, and there's always something wild about a 50-burger, is it's the 3rd straight game Devin Booker's done this against the Pelicans, where he scored 50 or more. Of course, the only other player to do this is Wilt Chamberlain, who's done it three times against the same opponent as well. It's insane. Anytime you're on level with Wilt on anything, it's almost like mythic, you know? It's insane. I can't believe that. When I was reading it, I was like, wow, Book really likes to cook Pelicans. It's his 3rd 50th point game of the season, and the Suns would then host the Cavaliers, beat them by 21. Booker only scored 40 in that one, but man, the sun is getting hot this time of the year. It is hot right now. Beal still hasn't found his way in the offense, but with KD and Booker doing their thing, Beal just has to fill in when called upon. It's like, okay, can you get us some buckets? Give us a little break? He'll get the buckets probably. You do not want to play them in a 7-game series. I'm sounding like I'm broken record here, but the Suns, the Clippers, these are dangerous teams. I know New Orleans doesn't want to play this team. I don't know how many times Booker would go for 50 in that series. In the 8th spot out west, you got the Sacramento Kings. They went 2-2 this past week, losing at home to the Mavericks. They'd bounce back and beat the Jazz and Clippers. They'd then go on the road and look poised to pick up a win at Madison Square Garden, but they gave up that 21-point lead to lose to the Knicks, as I mentioned earlier. This team is only 1 game back of the Suns as of recording, and they want to catch them to avoid the whole play-in situation, right? During the past week, the Kings were dealt a massive blow, though. 6th man of the year favorite, at least in my books, Malik Monk, suffered an MCL sprain in the first quarter in that loss to the Mavericks, so should keep him out a few weeks. He's such a huge spark of the bench. You just can't replicate that, so who fills in? You just extend starter Keegan Murray's minutes, ask him to play a little more? Maybe give Chris Duarte a little more time, or last year's EuroLeague MVP, Sasha Vezenkov. He's kind of disappeared from the rotation. Maybe this is his time to come in and do some damage on American soil. It's been a while since we've seen him on the floor. De'Aaron Fox, NBA triple-double leader, Domantas Sabonis, those 2 guys, this is their team. They're going to be asked to do even more with Monk being out here. And they got some tough ones coming up. Boston, they face the Nets, the Thunder, and the Pelicans. So some big games here for the Kings. We'll see where they're at by next episode. And just behind the Kings in the standings in that 9th spot of the Los Angeles Lakers. They went 3-1 this past week. They seem to be getting healthy at the right time here. Head coach Darvin Ham been working the starters a bit more. It's like he's tightened up his rotation. Coaches like to do it in the postseason, but it is kind of the postseason in the Western Conference. It's so close. It feels like the playoffs already. Their recent 3-game winning streak is giving them slim chances of escaping the play-in rounds, but they really have their work to cut out for them to get out of that. They got games against the Cavs, Timberwolves, and Warriors before next week's episode, so we should really know by then if they're going to be in the playing games or not. But watching what LeBron is doing at his age is amazing. You can tell what the way he talks about it, like he's feeling it, but he's still performing at such a high level. It's just insanity. D'Angelo Russell, his consistency is amazing. He lacked his consistency in his first run around with the Lakers, but you can tell his growth as a player. Austin Reeves looking like the Austin Reeves we expected. Biggest reason of the success of the Lakers, though, it's Anthony Davis. He's reminding us of what he can do when he can stay on the floor. That game against the Wizards example, 35 points, 18 rebounds, 3 blocks. He's the difference maker right now for LA. If the Lakers get matched up with any of those young teams I've talked about, you can't tell me they're not going to be a little worried about this Lakers team. If they get there, another if. Here's another if. Wrapping up the Pacific, team that holds that last play-in spot, the Golden State Warriors. They went 4-0 this past week as they now have the current longest winning streak in the NBA at 6 games. Warriors beat the Hornets and won a tight one in San Antonio. Then they'd end the Mavericks' 7-game winning streak in a close win before destroying the Houston Rockets, a team that's been chasing them in the standings. Warriors showed up and the Rockets did not. Steph Curry bringing back more movie references that the Rockets brought up. I might not even watch the movie. It's so old. This team's getting hot at the right time, like a few other teams I mentioned earlier, That puts fear in the players because when the Warriors are cooking, nobody cooks like the Warriors. It's like a special guest on an episode of Chopped, You're like, wow, they're cooking. When the Warriors play the Mavericks, Jazz, Lakers, and Blazers before next week's episode. So those games will really help paint a picture of what our playoffs will look like. We have a painting that's just ready to get finished up here. I mean, if the Warriors win out, they have a chance of getting out of the play-in, but I think that's past. I think the Warriors are going to be in the playing game, and they're going to scare the shit out of you when you got to suit up against them. They've won titles. They have title winners on this team. They have champions. You can't question the heart of a champion. But we're in for some wild playing games. The play-in hasn't been around a long time, but we're going to see some shit. We'll wrap up the team recaps by going to the Southwest Division, starting with the division-leading Dallas Mavericks, 5th best record in the Western Conference. They went 3-1 this past week, beating the Kings and Rockets before having that 7-game winning streak ruined by the Warriors that I just mentioned. The Mavs then bounced back by beating up the Hawks. This team's won 8 of 9. They've been flying up the standings. Luka Doncic's been playing at an MVP level, and now that they're getting the wins, maybe his name should be in there. Kyrie Irving's been unreal as well. I love how he and Luka are playing together. Everyone that said they couldn't, eating their words now. Took time, but man, it looks glorious now. I've mentioned how wonderful it is to watch these guys play with each other. They're so skilled. Luka's put a lot of trust in his teammates now. That's not something you can just do. Trust is developed, right? And if he believes in his teammates, like he's showing right now in the postseason, they can do some damage in the playoffs. And this Mavs team, they've been looking to get back to the finals. They haven't been back since they won it back in 2011. It's been a long time since Disco Dirks walked through that door, so we'll see what the Mavs can do. Another team you do not want to be in a series with. Just behind the Mavs in that division are the Pelicans, sitting 7th in the West. They were fucking flying and soaring as Pelicans do this time of year, but they went 0-3 this past week. Riding that 3-game losing streak, the Pels fell to the Celtics, Suns, and Magic. I mean, that's a tough 3-game stretch for any team. Pelicans have just been trying to coast in the air without Brandon Ingram. He's been dealing with that injury. Zion and CJ have been doing their thing, but it's working before the losing streak. It's just not holding out right now. Zion might miss the next game against the Spurs. He hurt his finger in that loss to the Magic. That loss to the Magic had such a weird ending to it. 3 Pelicans ejected in the last seconds of the game. Official Sean Corbin looked like a baseball umpire tossing Pelicans out like nothing. You're out of here. You're out of here. It was like someone at the bar throwing everyone out. It was weird. Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Dyson Daniels all thrown out. And these are like the quietest dudes. If you watch the Pelicans play, like these dudes don't talk a lot. So it was weird to see them all get tossed with like 7 seconds left. It's very weird. Maybe those ejections will give some injections of energy to this team, and the Pels can finish the season out strong. I mentioned that game against the Spurs, potentially without Zion. They then play the Suns. Who knows how much Booker will get. Then the Blazers and the Kings for the next episode. This West is tight. Every game is huge here. The one team on the outside of the play-in spots with a slight chance to sneak in are those Houston Rockets. They had a tough week, which didn't help their chances, going 1-3. They beat the Jazz, but then lost three straight, losing to the Mavericks and then Timberwolves before they were obliterated by the Warriors. Injured Rocket Terry Easton even called out the Warriors during that Rockets winning streak, going, Warriors, come out and play. He wore that shirt to the game, and it backfired. The Warriors beat the shit out of the team and mocked him throughout, especially Splash Brothers, Clay and Curry. They were like beaking him. Curry had the glasses clinking together. It was ugly. But Houston's got some games against the Heat, the Mavericks, the Magic, and the Jazz. Those games will let us know if the Rockets can increase their chances of getting in the play-ins. I mentioned they're slim, but there's a chance. This Rockets team has picked up some valuable experience over this late postseason push, winning games, taking lumps like against the Warriors. But even if this team comes up short making the playoffs, you got to be excited to see them next season. Amen Thompson, what he's been doing lately. We're going to see more Cam Whitmore. And will Jalen Green even take that next step and have that amazing run he had during the scoring run? Can he do that even more consistently throughout an entire year? That's optimism in Houston right now. Houston, we don't have a problem at the moment. We're walking to Memphis, where the Grizzlies have trying to end the season pretty well here, even though they've had injuries and suspensions. You know, they will not give up. I now know, never think if a Grizzlies chasing you, just keep running because they won't give up. They went 2-1 this past week, getting blown out by the Magic, and then get a rare 2-game winning streak, holding on to win a tight one at home, and then going on the road and beating Milwaukee for the second time this season. This Grizzlies team just goes out and amazes every night. Jaren Jackson Jr., he's been the one constant, and he balled out against the Bucks, 35 points. Again, not a lot of rebounds. That's been my one knock on JJJ. But anywho, GG Jackson, he's shown he's very deserving of that roster spot, doing his thing out there. I mentioned Canadian Brandon Clark's returned to the lineup lately. He had missed 13 months after tearing his Achilles, so it's just good to see him get back on the court and play the game he loves. And we'll wrap up the team recaps by going to the basement of the Western Conference, where my San Antonio Spurs reside. They are 1-2 this past week, playing against some stiff competition. I mentioned the Knicks portion, that overtime win, where number one overall pick Victor Wembanyama had the game ball and launched it into the crowd, earning a $25,000 fine and some dirty looks from Jalen Brunson, who's like, hey, that's my 61-point ball, guy. But hey, Wemby didn't have a bad game either. 40 points, 20 rebounds, 7 dimes. That's a game. The Spurs would then lose a tight one to the Warriors and then fall to the Nuggets. That game against the Nuggets, two-time MVP Nikola Jokic said he could not believe what Wemby was doing. After the game, he said of Wemby, if you block one more shot, I'm going to do something. But then he blocked like 4 more after that, so I guess they didn't do anything about it. But he got the win, though. So that Wemby again approached quadruple double status, 23 points, 15 boards, 8 assists, and 9 blocks. It's not a question of when or if he gets a triple or a quadruple double. It's a question of when he does it, and not just when, but how many times is he going to do it. It's unreal what he can do. The Spurs only have 6 games left in the season, so you know I'll be tuning in. That's a weekly recap in a nutshell. Seems weird. There's only one more after this in the regular season, and as it approaches, another quick announcement. A few players have been announced for the 2024 Basketball Hall of Fame. Ewan Pogo Stick, Raptors legend Vince Carter, former NBA champion Chauncey Billups have been inducted. The rest of the announcements will be made this weekend, but that's always exciting. I knew Vince would get in. No question Vince Carter was getting in. Chauncey Billups, I like it. I could see how some people are like, what? He was very important on those Pistons team. He was the leader. He was the NBA Finals MVP for the Pistons as they won the title and ruined the Lakers dynasty. He's a dynasty killer. You got to put him in the Hall. From team recaps to some individual numbers, starting with scoring leader Mavericks Luka Doncic. I'm a Spurs guy through and through, but I had to wear a Mavericks jersey just for what Luka and the fucking Mavericks are doing right now. It's crazy. He's averaging 33.8 a game. 2 other guys above the 30-point mark, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Oklahoma City Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Jalen Brunson and Phoenix Devin Booker round out the top 5. Heading to the cleaners of the boards, rebounding leader, still Sacramento's Domantas Sabonis, 13.7 a game. Just behind him, Rudy Gobert, LA's Anthony Davis, Denver's Nikola Jokic, and Detroit's Jalen Duren. When we talk assist leaders, still no change at the top. Tyrese Halliburton of the Pacers, only guy averaging double figures at 11. Behind him, you got Doncic, you got Jokic, Clippers, James Harden, and Sabonis rounding out the top five. Going to the other side of the ball, OKC's SGA is still leading the league in steals at 2.1, but Sacramento's De'Aaron Fox, Swipe at Fox, is literally right behind him at 2 per game. Portland's Matisse Thybulle and Chicago's Alex Caruso and LA's Kawhi Leonard round out the top five. Looking at rim protectors, look no further than the Sky at number 1 overall pick, Victor Wembanyama, the Spurs rookie, leading the league in blocks still at 3.5 per game. Milwaukee's Brook Lopez, Utah's Walker Kessler, LA's Anthony Davis, and Oklahoma City's rookie of their own, Chet Holmgren, round out the top five. Not many Ren City top fives left this season, so a little bit of a shake-up here. Not so much the top 3 picks. Celtics still number 1, Nuggets number 2, T-Wolves 3, Dallas Mavericks number 4, and LA Clippers number 5. It's almost the end of the season, so like I said, I shook it up. Celtics still best record in the league by a mile. Championship rings on their mind. Defending champions hold down that number 2 spot even without Murray once he's back. Like I said, they'll be a whole different team. They need him back. But if they don't get him back, they're not just going to be a number 2 spot. They'll end up smelling like a number 2. The Timberwolves still in third, but could very well be in second, continuing to do great things with that cat in the injured cage. Rounding out the Ren City top 5, like I said, 2 new newbies to the list. Dallas, they've been cooking lately, and they're hot. They deserve to be in the list right now. The Clippers cooking as well, and they should be on this list as well, even with Kawhi getting some much-needed rest. Like I said, he's played most of the season, more than seasons past. Let the man rest a bit. I bounced the Thunder off the list with their recent losing skid, and with that loss to the Wizards, the Bucks had to get right off that list real quick. We talk rankings, let's talk individual trophies, MVP choice. So damn close at the top, and I think at this point it's going to go to whoever has the better record in the win-loss column. Oklahoma City's SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's been my guy most of the season. This losing streak of the Thunder really show his importance as he's missed a little bit of games here. Nikola Jokic, though, what he's doing, it's insane. He might get his 3rd MVP, and I think it's fully deserved. I have to fully disagree with Gilbert Arenas on this one, saying Jokic is the worst MVP. I totally disagree with that. That's got some haterade in there or something, but I'm not even going to watch it to hear his understanding because there's just so much hate beyond that. I don't know. Ain't loving the hate on that. But you got to mention Luka as well. He's sneaking up there just because they're getting wins. And you know what? You could give it to Jason Tatum as well, just because so damn dominant the Celtics are. I wouldn't hate that either, but I'm still going to stick with OKC's SGA in my book. I think he's going to win MVP. Rookie of the year, again, this was a close race at one point, but just like horse racing, sometimes that one horse just takes off and you're like, shit, maybe it wasn't that close. That's how I feel right now. OKC's Chet Holmgren, San Antonio's Victor Wembanyama, they were neck and neck, but Wembanyama's long neck is extended like MJ's arm in Space Jam, and he's way ahead. Got to shout out Amen Thompson. I mentioned him in the Rockets portion, what he's been doing lately, and it's been helping them win. Helping your team win is pretty important, I'd say. Brandon Miller's looking the real deal in Charlotte. Look for those numbers to get better, especially once those shooting percentages go up a little more, but just give Wemby that Rookie of the Year already. 6th Man of the Year, I'm still thinking Malik Monk. Ugh, that injury, just what a buzzkill to a guy having a killer season. Karis LeVert, I mentioned him. He's a bench killer. He not in a good way. He doesn't kill the bench. He comes off the bench and kills. There you go. Cleaned it up a bit. But he's the real deal. Bobby Portis with Milwaukee. He can have his name in there, but I got to go with Malik Monk in this one. Most improved, again, a tight one. When people say Tyrese Maxey, I'm like, he's an all-star. He's recognized. He's good. I still like Chicago's Kobe White to win that one. If not him, ATL's Jalen Johnson. That guy looks like a future all-star in this league. You heard it here. Future all-star Jalen Johnson. If not in Atlanta, somewhere. Defensive Player of the Year, it's going to a Frenchman. But which one? The alien leading the league in blocks by a mile? Or, he could have more blocks, but people are scared of him. People fear aliens, and people fear that alien. But I think it still might go to Rudy Gobert. The guy, he's up there in rebounds. He's anchoring the best defense in the league. I mean, that matters. And if they win the Western Conference, I think this is the last one Rudy can pull, because I think They might have to rename it the Wembanyama Award going forward. Heading coach of the year, I still think it's going to West. I think it's going to one of those top teams, either Chris Finch in Minnesota or Mark Daigneault in OKC. Like I said, with Minnesota, a lot of people thought this team would implode during the season. I did at the beginning of the season. I've never been so wrong. They've consistently been one of the best teams in the West. Even with the injury to Karl Anthony Towns, you thought they'd struggle. They've kind of improved. So he's got to be up there. The Oklahoma City Thunder, second youngest team in the league. They're doing things that teams that age aren't supposed to do. So that alone should have him in there. And if not those guys, we got to give it to JB Bickerstaff for the Cavs. I mentioned the injuries they have, third in the conference. It's amazing. But are we just kind of shrugging off what Joe Mazzulla's doing? I know we all expect him to be the best player, or the best. We expect the Celtics to be the best team, and what he's doing with them, he's leading them to the best record. He's doing what is expected, and sometimes that's hard to do. So I could be happy with either of those two guys out of the West or the East getting it, but I'm thinking it's going to go to Chris Finch personally. But that's another episode in the books. It's episode 23. Felt good. Kind of a bummer. Only one more left in the regular season, but that just means the playoffs coming, baby. And the West is tight. First to 10th, only separated by 11 games, while Boston has a 13-game lead over the second-place Milwaukee Bucks. Shows you how tough it is to win in the West and what that gauntlet of a playoff will be like. Can't wait. But remember, NCAA basketball tournament's wrapping up this weekend. Women's semifinals tonight, Friday. Got your Caitlin Clark, Paige Becker's battle. You got South Carolina probably staying undefeated and going to another final. You got the men's semifinals Saturday, and then you have the women's final Sunday, men's final Monday. Future NBA ballers in that one. It's good stuff. That's what it's about. This is basketball. Best time of year to be watching it, yo. It's March into April. April ball brings more May ball, I guess I should say. Thanks for tuning in, Ren City, for sports and sorts.